Imagine applying for a job, getting rejected, and years later watching that same company pay $19 billion for something you built instead. It sounds unbelievable, but that's exactly what happened to Jan Koum. Before creating WhatsApp, he grew up in poverty, relied on government assistance, and had no guarantee that his dreams would ever come true. But one rejection changed the course of his life forever. Jan Koum was born in a small village in Ukraine, where his family struggled financially. Life was difficult and opportunities were limited. When he was 16 years old, his mother decided they should move to the United States in search of a better future. They arrived in California with very little money and had to rely on government assistance just to survive. They lived in a small apartment and every dollar mattered. While many teenagers were focused on fitting in, Jan became fascinated with computers. He couldn't afford expensive classes or the latest technology, so he spent countless hours teaching himself by reading books borrowed from public libraries. Every page he read brought him one step closer to a future he couldn't yet imagine. As his knowledge grew, Jan found work as a security engineer and later joined Yahoo, where he spent nearly a decade building his technical skills. During that time, he met Brian Acton and the two became close friends. They eventually left Yahoo together, believing it was time for a new challenge. Confident in their experience, they began applying for jobs at some of the biggest technology companies in Silicon Valley. One of those companies was Facebook. Jan applied. He wasn't hired. Brian applied. He wasn't hired either. Most people would have taken that rejection personally. Most people would have questioned their abilities or settled for another job. But Jan Koum made a different decision. Instead of waiting for another company to give him an opportunity, he decided to create one for himself. That decision became the turning point of his life. In 2009, smartphones were becoming more common, but messaging was still expensive and often unreliable. Sending text messages could cost money, especially across different countries. Jan believed communication should be simple, fast, and available to everyone. He didn't want to build a complicated social network. He wanted to create an app that did one thing exceptionally well. Simple messaging, no advertisements, no games, no unnecessary features, just a fast and reliable way for people to stay connected. That app became WhatsApp. The early days were far from easy. The app crashed. User growth was slow. There were moments when Jan thought about giving up, but Brian Acton encouraged him to keep going. Together, they focused on improving the product instead of chasing quick profits. They believed that if people truly loved the app, success would eventually follow. Slowly, that belief proved to be true. More people downloaded WhatsApp. Friends invited friends. Families used it to stay connected across the world. Businesses began relying on it every day. Without spending millions on advertising, WhatsApp spread almost entirely through word of mouth. People recommended it because it simply worked. Within just a few years, hundreds of millions of people were using the app. Then, in 2014, something incredible happened. Facebook, the same company that had once rejected Jan Koum, offered to buy WhatsApp for approximately $19 billion. It became one of the biggest technology acquisitions in history. The young immigrant who once depended on food assistance and couldn't get hired by Facebook was now signing one of Silicon Valley's biggest deals. Jan Koum became a billionaire, but the lesson from his story isn't about building a messaging app. It isn't about selling a company for billions, and it isn't about becoming rich. The real lesson is about rejection. Most people see rejection as proof they aren't good enough. Jan Koum saw it as an opportunity to create something even better. If Facebook had hired him, WhatsApp might never have existed. The turning point wasn't selling the company. It wasn't becoming a billionaire. It wasn't making headlines around the world. The turning point was the moment Jan Koum stopped waiting for someone else to choose him and decided to build something the world would choose instead. Because sometimes the greatest opportunities begin with the words no one wants to hear. And that's how one rejection changed Jan Koum's life forever.